Love? Not really something I prioritized. At 28, I was a rising star at my finance firm. Numbers made more sense to me than people. Give me a spreadsheet over a dinner date any day, and I was content. My cubicle wasn't just a workspace, it was my sanctuary. It hummed with the kind of order and logic I craved. Dating apps? A hard no? And bars? Loud, sticky floors, forced conversations. No, thank you. But then came Sarah's rooftop party. Sarah, my coworker and best friend, had this magical way of dragging me out of my predictable world. She thrived in the chaos I avoided. That night was a mix of artists, musicians, and a sprinkle of our office crowd. I was already planning my exit before I even got to the rooftop. That's when I saw him. He was tall, lean, with eyes that looked like they'd seen more than he let on. His dark brown hair was messy in that I just ran my fingers through it way. He wore a worn leather jacket over a faded tee that probably featured a band I couldn't name, the complete opposite of the buttoned-up guys from my office. And yet there was something about him that pulled me in. He was deep in conversation, half arguing with another guy about restoring brick buildings. "You really think slapping a fresh coat of paint on history is a good idea?" he asked, his smile teasing. "It preserves the structure, right?" the other guy shot back. "Yeah, but it erases the story," he said, eyes lighting up. "The cracks, the wear, that's the soul of the place." Something clicked inside me. I don't know why, but I found myself walking closer, eavesdropping like a kid sneaking into grown-up talk. Just then, Sarah appeared beside me, grinning like a cat with a secret. "Carol, this is Mark," she said, nudging me forward. "Mark, this is Carol Tomé, spreadsheet wizard, lover of numbers, avoider of fun." "Spreadsheet wizard?" he said, turning to me. His smile, warm, easy, dangerous. "It pays the bills," I replied, cheeks heating. "But I do more than balance numbers. I can handle a conversation without mentioning amortization schedules." "Challenge accepted," he chuckled. "So, Carol, what's your take on preserving history?" We ended up talking for hours, about everything and nothing. He was an architect, passionate about old buildings and bringing them back to life. I told him about my life in finance, the late nights, the thrill of landing a deal. There were no awkward silences, just this flow, natural, like we'd known each other forever. By the time we stood by the railing, city lights twinkling below, my arms had goosebumps. Not from the cold, but something else entirely. "This was fun," I admitted, voice softer than I meant it to be. "Yeah," he said, still watching the skyline. "I wouldn't mind doing this again." "Me neither," I blurted out, surprising even myself. That was how it started. One rooftop night that turned into coffee dates, weekend hikes, slow mornings with pancakes, and laughing at things only we found funny. Months later, I found myself sitting across from Mark's parents, Martha and Arthur, in a ridiculously fancy restaurant. Think chandeliers, 3 forks per setting, and a soup I couldn't pronounce. The conversation started fine. Wedding plans, the venue, a stunning old converted library, and my stress over finding a caterer who wouldn't charge a kidney for organic, locally sourced canapés. Then came the turn. Mid-lobster bisque, or bisky, as Martha called it with a forced accent. She looked up from her napkin and locked eyes with me. "So, Carol," she said sweetly, but her tone had an edge. "Mark tells me you're in finance?" "Yes," I replied cautiously. "I'm a financial analyst at a firm downtown." "Analyst, huh?" Arthur added, his voice loud enough to startle nearby diners. "Must be doing well for yourself." Mark shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "Dad, come on." "Just chatting," Arthur said, waving a hand. Then to me, "Big-name firm, I hope?" I gave the name. It was well-known, international, prestigious. Martha's smile grew. "Excellent. And you say you do well for yourself? Investments? Portfolios?" "Yes," I replied slowly. "I manage a portfolio." Her eyes sparkled like a cat who'd just found an open can of tuna. "How much are we talking about here, dear?" I blinked. Did she just ask? My jaw tensed. This was beyond nosy. It was inappropriate. I looked at Mark, hoping for rescue. Nothing. He avoided my gaze, playing with the breadbasket. "That's a bit personal, Mrs. Miller," I said, forcing a smile. "Oh, come on, honey," she huffed. "We're practically family now, isn't that right, Mark?" He mumbled something unintelligible, face red. I tried to hold it together. "Look," I said calmly, "money isn't everything. Mark and I love each other. That's what matters." "Love is great, sweetheart," Arthur chimed in, "but love doesn't pay the bills." Breathe, Carol, just breathe. Maybe we should talk about the wedding again? I suggested, desperate to steer us back to neutral ground. The next morning, still stewing from the interrogation disguised as dinner, I called my grandma. If there's one voice in my life that always cuts through the noise, it's hers. And let me tell you, she didn't hold back. Greedy and selfish people, Carol, she muttered after I told her everything. You keep your eyes open, you hear me? I sighed. Grandma, it was just one dinner. They were probably just being awkward. But even as I said it, doubt had started to creep in like a slow leak under the floorboards. I tried to shake it off. After all, we were planning a wedding. People got weird. Emotions were high, right? That fantasy didn't last long. Wedding planning turned into an uphill battle. Every vendor, every flower, every chair color became a financial negotiation. Mark kept shrugging, saying things like, "Work's been a little tight." His solution? Cheaper venues outside the city, a family friend who could do amazing catering in exchange for, get this, fresh produce from someone's backyard. I kid you not. And guess who ended up covering almost everything? Yours truly. Mark would pat my back and whisper, "You're amazing, honey, handling everything like a champ." Sweet words, no action. I was the one cutting checks and negotiating with florists. Still, I held on to hope, because when the day came, despite all the stress, it really was beautiful. The sun shone, the flowers were perfect, and Mark and I said, "I do." But the only cloud in the sky? My grandma. After the ceremony, she pulled me aside, her voice low, her hands warm as they clasped mine. "Carol, honey," she said with a softness that almost made me cry, "be careful with those in-laws of yours. They don't have your best interests at heart." I smiled weakly. "Grandma, they love Mark. They love me. Everything's fine." She didn't argue, just gave me a look. One of those long, deep looks only grandmothers can give. The kind that say, "We'll see." Turns out she had every reason to worry. Barely a week after the wedding, the honeymoon phase still fresh, we woke up one quiet Sunday to a thump downstairs. A big one. I blinked at Mark. "Was that the mail?" "Probably," he muttered, still half asleep. "Wrong. When we got downstairs, what we saw could have been mistaken for a crime scene. Only instead of blood, it was floral wrapping paper and torn ribbons. Martha and Arthur were in the middle of the living room, surrounded by half-opened wedding gifts. They looked like kids on Christmas morning, if those kids were over 60 and lacked basic boundaries. "What are you doing?" I gasped, completely stunned. Martha looked up with a wide smile. "Carol, darling, we're just admiring the beautiful gifts. You got so many lovely things." "Admiring? This looks like a looting." Arthur held up a crystal vase like it was a trophy. "Just sorting through. Can't let all this clutter pile up, right?" "Clutter?" My blood pressure shot through the roof. "These are wedding gifts," I said sharply. "From people we care about." Mark finally chimed in. "Maybe just leave them alone for now?" he mumbled. "Exactly," I nodded, relieved. At least he wasn't completely blind. Martha waved him off. "Don't be silly. It's rude not to open presents. Besides," she added with a glint in her eyes, "we might find something truly special." And by special, she meant gifts for herself. I watched as they picked through everything. A silver photo frame here, an engraved wine glass there, even a fancy cheese board. One by one, all the best gifts were set aside. For who? Themselves, apparently. That was the final straw. "These are not yours to take," I said, voice trembling but firm. Martha blinked. "Oh, sweetie, we just thought some of these would look perfect in our new place. You know, since we're redecorating?" I stared at her. "With our wedding gifts?" No shame. Not even a flicker of guilt, just smug entitlement. Then she handed me a box. "Here," she said sweetly. "This one's from us." I opened it slowly. Tissue paper gave way to a glass statuette, a cheap dollar store kind of thing, decorated with plastic flowers. My face fell. This was what they thought of us? That day I stopped pretending, and it only got worse from there. Martha started calling weekly for girls' days. Sounded sweet, right? Until I realized what it actually meant. She dragged me through department stores, found things she couldn't live without, and then, like clockwork, would suddenly forget her wallet. Every single time. She'd shuffle her things in with mine at checkout, acting like it was no big deal. I paid every time. Arthur wasn't better. He dropped by unannounced, plopped on our couch, turned on our TV, and ate every snack we had. One day I dared to ask, "Why do you spend so much time here?" He looked me dead in the eye. "Saves money on groceries and electricity." I nearly lost it. Mark just shrugged. He's lonely. No, he was lazy, entitled, rude. But lonely? That didn't give him a free pass to raid our pantry. But I kept pushing it all down, swallowing my frustration, thinking maybe it was just part of being in a family, until the night everything came crashing down. It was my birthday. And after the chaos of the wedding, the presents, and all the passive-aggressive comments from Martha and Arthur, I wanted something simple, a night out, a fancy dinner, nothing too wild, just a little moment for me. I made the reservations, picked the place, and yes, I invited Mark's parents, mostly out of obligation. I figured if I kept the setting classy enough, they might behave. Big mistake. The restaurant was one of those high-end French places with candlelight and whispery ambiance. The kind of place where you order something fancy and have no idea what it actually is. Martha was immediately impressed, or maybe just pretending to be. She read the menu like it was a foreign novel and ordered the most expensive thing she could find, announcing each item like she was auditioning for a food channel. Escargot, she said with way too much confidence. Arthur followed her lead, ordering bouillabaisse and some imported wine that probably cost more than my first car payment. Halfway through the meal, Martha pushed her escargot aside with a disgusted face. "Too slimy," she said loudly, like it was my fault. Then Arthur, mid-bite, coughed so hard on a spoonful of seafood stew that saffron broth splattered across the white tablecloth. And my dress. I sat there stunned, holding my napkin against the damage. They didn't apologize, not once. They laughed. And when the bill came, guess who reached for her card? Yep, me. Mark didn't even blink. He just sat back, sipping his wine like he hadn't noticed the whole circus. Back home, I had reached my limit. I kicked off my shoes and turned to him, heat rising in my chest. "Mark," I said, "how can you let your parents walk all over us like this, over me?" He looked up, slow and calm, like I'd just asked what time it was. "Babe, they're just like that." "Like what?" I shot back. "Entitled? Rude? Completely incapable of basic manners?" "They're not trying to be hurtful. You're taking this too seriously," he said with a shrug, as if my feelings were just a glitch in the system. I stared at him, mouth open. "Are you even listening to me?" "I am," he said, "but you gotta pick your battles." That was it. That was the phrase that broke me. Pick my battles? I'd picked every battle already. With myself. Swallowed every ounce of frustration. Smiled through it. Paid for it. Literally. I'd picked silence when I should have shouted, grace when I should have walked away. I went to bed with tears in my eyes and a new kind of weight on my chest. The heaviness of realizing you're alone in a marriage, even when someone's lying right beside you. And still it wasn't the end. The pattern continued. Martha and Arthur had mastered the art of giving cheap, thoughtless gifts and expecting the world in return. One Christmas, they gave us, no joke, a framed picture of a lighthouse. For Mother's Day, Martha casually dropped a list. She wanted a high-end espresso machine, top of the line, something stylish and sleek. Her words. When I gently pointed out the imbalance, she launched into a speech about family not keeping score. Meanwhile, my grandmother, the only person who had ever truly shown me unconditional love, never asked for a single thing. When I offered to buy her something for the holidays, she'd just say, "Honey, I've got everything I need. Just come visit me." The contrast was staggering. Martha and Arthur treated gift-giving like it was a competition, and I was the only one playing fair. Every visit, they came armed with their latest treasure, a chipped fruit bowl, a scratched DVD set, mismatched oven mitts with cartoon cats that looked like they'd been pulled from a bargain bin. I started to dread every holiday, but Thanksgiving was the final straw. I had planned a cozy evening, just me and Mark. Take out a movie, maybe a glass of wine. Peace, finally. But no. Martha and Arthur arrived without warning, arms full of shopping bags and forced cheer. "Happy Thanksgiving, sweetie," Martha sang, handing me a box wrapped in bright paper. I already knew it was going to be awful. I opened it to find a scarf, if you could even call it that. It felt like sandpaper, smelled faintly like mothballs, and was decorated with fake plastic flowers. It clashed violently with the vintage coat I'd just found at a thrift store. "It matches your new coat perfectly," she beamed. I forced a smile that probably looked like a grimace. Arthur handed Mark a box with a grin. "For you, son. A little something to help you unwind." Mark tore it open with the enthusiasm of a child on Christmas morning. Inside, a pack of cheap cigars, the kind that reeked of old ashtrays and regret. "Thanks, Dad," he said, like he'd been handed gold. I stared at him, at both of them. The room spun. My hands were cold, my face hot. This wasn't just about a bad gift anymore. This was about a husband who didn't see the problem, who didn't want to see it. I could have yelled, could have thrown the scarf in the trash and told them exactly what I thought, but instead I smiled. I thanked them for the lovely gifts. And quietly deep inside, something hardened. A few weeks later, everything changed. At work, I landed a major win. Quarterly MVP, a hefty bonus, one of those rare moments where everything feels worth it. I was on a high, a real one. So I made a decision. Venice. Romantic, historic, beautiful. The canals, the wine, the architecture, everything I loved. And I spoke fluent Italian. It was my dream trip, and I wanted to share it with Mark. Just him and me. A reset. A break from everything, especially his parents. I booked it. And just like that, the world came crashing down again. The moment Martha and Arthur found out about our Venice plans, it was like blood in the water. They descended faster than you could say romantic getaway. "Venice, huh?" Martha crooned, her eyes sparkling with greedy anticipation. "Sounds simply divine. Always wanted to ride in one of those little boats. What do you call them?" "Gondolas," I said flatly, hoping the lack of enthusiasm would send a message. But Arthur leaned in too. "What a perfect opportunity. We've never been to Europe. We could all go together. Think of the pictures." I stared, mouth slightly open. Were they serious? "Actually," I said carefully, "this is just a trip for Mark and me. A little time for us to reconnect." Martha's smile thinned. "Reconnect? Are we in trouble already, dear?" Arthur laughed like it was a joke, but I wasn't laughing. Mark stayed quiet. Then, when the silence got thick, he finally mumbled, "I mean, they could come, right? Maybe it wouldn't be that bad." That's when I snapped. I turned to him, my voice calm but ice cold. "No, Mark, absolutely not. This is our trip. They are not invited." The room froze. What followed was a fight so brutal, it felt like emotional warfare. Martha called me selfish. Arthur accused me of turning Mark against his family. Mark tried to play peacemaker, but all he did was make excuses. Again. Words flew, accusations were hurled, doors were slammed. By the time it was over, we were barely speaking. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. Like the calm before a storm. We tiptoed around each other in the apartment, trading awkward good mornings and cold silences. Then one Saturday morning, I woke up alone. No Mark in bed, no note. I reached for my phone, still foggy with sleep. And that's when I saw it. Email notifications, airline tickets, hotel confirmations. 3 of them, all booked from my account. At first, I thought I was dreaming. But no. As I scrolled through the confirmations, reality hit me like a slap to the face. Mark had used my bank account to book the Venice trip, for himself and his parents. He booked their plane tickets, their hotel rooms, all with the bonus I had earned. My hard work, my dream. I stared at the screen in disbelief, the anger rising like fire under my skin. Not even shame, just pure betrayal. I felt like I'd been robbed by someone I trusted with my life. My fingers moved fast. First, I canceled every booking. Hotel, flights, gone. Then I changed the password to my bank account and revoked his access. One click. Done. I sat in silence, heart pounding, the kind of silence that doesn't ask for company. An hour later, my phone lit up. Mark was calling. I didn't answer. A voicemail came in, then another, then 3 texts, then 6, then one from Martha. I didn't open them. But when I saw the final message from Mark, I let out a bitter laugh. "If you don't fix this, if you don't give us back the tickets and the account access, we're done. Consider this your divorce notice." I read it twice, and then I smiled. It wasn't panic, it wasn't heartbreak, it was relief. That same day, I made calls, hired a lawyer, started packing. The apartment felt cold, like all the warmth had been sucked out and replaced with disappointment. I left the souvenirs of that marriage behind. The chipped bowls, the tacky figurines, the cartoon cat oven mitts, all lined up on the living room floor like a sad little shrine to everything I'd endured. Then I shut the door. Grandma's house smelled like cinnamon and calm. The moment I stepped through the door, I broke. I cried like I hadn't let myself cry in months. Grandma didn't say much, just held me, stroked my hair, let me fall apart in peace. When I finally told her everything, she didn't gloat. She just whispered, "Sometimes the lesson comes wrapped in heartbreak, but it's still a gift." And she was right. A few days later, we were drinking tea in the kitchen when there was a knock at the door. My stomach twisted. Grandma peeked through the curtain, then gave me a look. "It's him, Mark." He looked wrecked, unshaven, eyes tired, holding his phone like a white flag. "Carol," he began, "please, just hear me out." I didn't say a word. He launched into apologies. He said he'd realized too late how wrong he'd been, that he was trying to create space from his parents, that he missed me, that we could fix it. I let him finish. Then I stepped out onto the porch, standing just far enough away that he couldn't touch me. "You weren't trying to fix anything, Mark," I said, my voice steady. "You were trying to keep things comfortable, for you, while I paid for everything, while I held up a marriage alone." He started to argue, but I raised a hand. "No, this isn't about your parents anymore. It's about you, about your choices, about the moment you thought it was okay to steal from me, and then threaten me." Tears welled in his eyes. I saw regret. I also saw fear. But I didn't see love. "I deserve someone who respects me," I said quietly, "who fights for me, not just what's easy." He tried to say my name again, but I turned and walked away. The door closed with a final, quiet click behind me. And that was that. Epilogue. My own Venice. I didn't waste time. I booked a new trip. Still to Venice. Just one ticket. I walked those canals alone, and it was better that way. I tasted wine with strangers, watched the sunset from bridges, and breathed in the history of a city that knew a thing or two about rebuilding. And when I came back, I didn't come back bitter. I came back whole. Carol Tomé. Not someone's wife, not someone's scapegoat, not a bank account to be raided, but me, with a future wide open and bright. Because sometimes starting over isn't a tragedy. It's the best damn thing you'll ever do.